the young, and the restless spoilers. Please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Tension surrounds Eric Breaden. For decades, he was a central figure on the show, the boss of Newman. For many viewers, Victor wasn't just a character. He was the backbone of the entire world they'd followed for years. But since the new writer arrived, he's been ruining the storyline, making it illogical and unappealing. Proof of this is the declining viewership. Viewers have a voice, forcing producers to adjust, or they risk losing their beloved audience. What makes things even more worrying is how quickly the story has shifted from decades of built-up admiration to a sudden wave of criticism that seems to wipe away years of loyalty. However, amidst all this uproar, Eric Breaden hasn't remained completely silent. He's chosen to confront it, but in his own way. In the interview, there were no dramatic excuses, no desperate attempts to regain approval. Eric was angry at being bombarded with questions from reporters about whether he intended to retire and whether the writer would be replaced. He refused to answer, and in that silence, there was something more powerful than any confirmation or denial. Because silence in a world that thrives on speculation becomes a statement in itself. Victor is too old now, and he holds so many crucial storylines in his hands that it leaves young people incapable of creating anymore. So let's stop. The possibility is that even the most immortal characters are not immune to change. For years, Victor has survived everything: betrayal, disease, enemies emerging from every corner. He's been shot, targeted countless times, but he always returns stronger, colder, more determined. That resilience has become part of the film's identity. Removing it would shift the entire balance. Will Victor be shot dead by Jack and end a war that has lasted for years? That's a perfect idea. If the film chooses that path, it would not only mark the end of a character, but potentially be a tipping point for many viewers. There's a deep emotional covenant between longtime audiences and a character like Victor. They've invested years, even decades, watching him rise and fall. Ending that journey abruptly, especially violently, might not seem like a natural ending, but rather a betrayal of everything that came before. And in a context where loyalty is already fragile, such a decision could alienate audiences rather than engage them. But there's another aspect that can't be ignored. Eric Breaden's refusal to comment may not be an avoidance, it may be a protection. A protection of the story, a protection of the audience experience, and perhaps even his own legacy. Because once something like this is confirmed, there's no turning back. The mystery vanishes, the tension collapses. And for a show that thrives on anticipation, that loss could be just as damaging as any controversial storyline. At the same time, the backlash he's facing complicates things. It creates an outside narrative that begins to influence itself. Fans begin to question the motives linking real-life tension to a fictional outcome. If Victor dies now, it won't just be seen as a creative decision. It will be interpreted, dissected, and possibly even exploited as a reaction to public pressure. And that perception alone could overshadow the story itself. There's something profoundly unsettling about seeing a character like Victor teetering on the brink of uncertainty. Not because death is a novelty in long-running television series, but because Victor has always been seen as an exception. A constant in a world built on chaos. Stripping that away forces everyone, writers, actors, and viewers, to confront what the show will be like without him. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a story can do is pause just before everything falls apart, leaving everyone suspended in the fragile space between the known and the terrifying. Whether Victor's fate is tragic or his survival miraculous, it is that very uncertainty that begins to drive the plot. The air in the Newman Ranch living room was thick, suffocatingly heavy, with a toxic blend of aged scotch, expensive perfume, and unadulterated hatred. The roaring fire in the massive stone hearth did nothing to chase the ice from the room. Above the mantel, the imposing portrait of Victor Newman seemed to sneer down at the fractured family gathered below. But the real Victor Newman sat in his leather armchair swirling a glass of tequila, his expression an impenetrable mask of arrogant defiance. You have lost your mind. Victor Nikki Newman hissed, her voice trembling with a rage so profound it shook her delicate frame. She paced the length of the Persian rug, her heels clicking like a metronome, counting down to an explosion. Kidnapping Jack, holding him hostage like a common thug. You haven't just crossed a line, you have obliterated it. You have brought the wrath of all of Genoa City down upon this family. Victor took a slow, deliberate sip of his drink. I did what was necessary to protect our interests, Nikki. Jack Abbott is a fool who needed to be taught a lesson. I protected this family, protected us. Nick Newman fired back, stepping out of the shadows. His fists were clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. You strapped a man to a chair in a damp warehouse, Dad. You committed a felony. You didn't protect us. You painted a target on our backs. You proved every terrible rumor about the Newman family completely right. Victoria stood rigidly by the mahogany wet bar, her sharp eyes darting between her father and her brother. The PR fallout alone is going to cost Newman Enterprises millions. She calculated aloud, her voice pure ice. The board is already whispering. If the authorities tie this to the company, we will lose our international partners by morning. Is that all you care about, Victoria? The stock price, Adam Newman drawled from the corner, a smirk playing on his lips. The old man finally snaps, commits a blatant act of terrorism against his oldest rival, and you're worried about the quarterly earnings. Shut up, Adam, Victoria snapped. You're probably thrilled. You've been waiting for him to self-destruct so you could swoop in and play savior. Enough, Victor bellowed, his voice booming off the vaulted ceilings. He slammed his glass down on the side table. I am the patriarch of this family. I built this empire with my bare hands. I will not be interrogated in my own home by my ungrateful children and a wife who has forgotten where her loyalties lie. Nikki stopped pacing. She turned to her husband of 40 years, her eyes brimming with a devastating mixture of heartbreak and pure venom. My loyalties lie with my morality, Victor, a morality you clearly no longer possess. The rift was absolute. In the days that followed the revelation of Jack Abbott's kidnapping, the Newman family did not heal. They festered. The ranch became a war zone of silent treatments and whispered threats. Yet the world outside demanded the illusion of perfection. Newman Enterprises was celebrating its golden jubilee, a milestone that required a grand gala at the top of the tower. They had to play their parts. They had to smile for the cameras. The night of the gala was a masterclass in deception. The top of the tower was transformed into a glittering palace of gold and black. Crystal chandeliers cast a dazzling light over Genoa City's elite. Nikki wore a gown of midnight blue silk, a diamond choker tied around her throat like a glittering noose. She smiled for the paparazzi, her arm linked with Victor's, though her touch was as cold as a corpse. Victoria moved through the crowd in sharp emerald velvet, shaking hands and assuring investors that Victor was in perfect health and sound mind. Nick stood by the bar, brooding, refusing to speak to the press, while Adam schmoozed with a dangerous glint in his eye, playing the role of the dutiful reformed son. At the stroke of 9, the string quartet ceased playing. The room fell into a hushed, expectant silence as Victor Newman took the podium. He stood tall, the undisputed king of Genoa City, bathed in the flashing lights of a dozen cameras. For 50 years, Newman Enterprises has stood as a beacon of power, innovation, and unwavering strength. Victor's baritone voice echoed through the microphone. He looked out over the crowd, his gaze briefly catching Jack Abbott, who stood near the back, his jaw clenched. Victor's lips curled into a faint, triumphant smile. They have tried to tear me down. They have tried to destroy my legacy. But let me assure you, Victor Newman is invincible. A waiter stepped forward, offering Victor a crystal flute of vintage champagne. Victor took it, raising it high. To family, to power, to the next 50 years, he brought the glass to his lips and drank deeply. For a moment, nothing happened. The crowd applauded. Then Victor's eyes widened. He gasped a sharp, ragged sound that cut through the applause. The crystal flute slipped from his fingers, shattering into 1,000 glittering pieces against the marble floor. Victor clutched his chest, his face turning a horrifying shade of ashen gray. He stumbled backward, knocking the microphone stand over with a screech of feedback. Victor Nicky screamed the sound tearing through the ballroom. Before anyone could reach him, the invincible Victor Newman collapsed, hitting the floor with a sickening thud. Chaos erupted. Guests shrieked, stampeding toward the exits as Nate Hastings shoved his way through the crowd, dropping to his knees beside the patriarch. Nate's hands flew to Victor's neck, searching frantically for a pulse. Nate looked up his eyes, meeting Nicky's terrified gaze. He's gone. He has no pulse. The king was dead. Within hours, the top of the tower was a crime scene. Detective Chance, Chancellor of the Genoa City Police Department, stood over the chalk outline, his jaw set. The autopsy results had been rushed, and they were undeniable. Victor Newman hadn't suffered a heart attack. He had been murdered. A lethal, fast-acting, synthesized neurotoxin had been introduced into his system. The immediate media narrative was entirely predictable. The Abbotts were the prime suspects. Jack Abbott had the ultimate motive revenge for his brutal kidnapping. Tucker McCall was brought in for questioning. Corporate rivals were scrutinized, but Chance was a meticulous detective, and the evidence told a different, far more sinister story. The toxicology report confirmed the poison was ingested. Chance reviewed the security footage from the gala. The champagne tray had been kept in a secured prep area guarded by Newman security. The only people who had access to that specific tray, the only people who had been alone with the glasses before the waiter brought them to the podium, were the members of the Newman family. The realization hit Chance like a physical blow. The killer wasn't an outside enemy. The call came from inside the house. A Newman had assassinated the patriarch. The GCPD interrogation room was a stark, unforgiving space, a brutal contrast to the luxury Nicky Newman was accustomed to. She sat at the metal table, her midnight blue gown stained with her husband's blood, her mascara running in dark tracks down her pale cheeks. "You threatened him," Nicky Chance said softly, leaning against the wall. "We have the statements from the household staff. You told Victor that if he didn't step down, you would stop him yourself. You said he was a monster." "He was my husband." Nicky slammed her hands on the table, her voice raw and broken. "I loved that man for 40 years. Yes, I was furious. Yes, what he did to Jack was unforgivable. I hated what he had become in these last few weeks, but I would never, ever take his life. I am not a murderer." Chance. But despite her adamant denials, Nicky was the prime suspect. She had the access, she had the rage, and she had the opportunity. Yet as the investigation deepened, the spotlight shifted, illuminating the dark, twisted motives of Victor's children. Each of them had a reason to want the old man dead. Adam Newman was brought in next. Chance slapped a thick file onto the table. "We found the offshore accounts, Adam. You were embezzling millions from Newman Media. You were building a war chest to launch a hostile takeover of the entire company." Adam leaned back, his face a mask of bored indifference, though a muscle feathered in his jaw. "My father was going to strip me of my division. Again. He dangled my inheritance in front of me like a carrot, only to yank it away whenever I didn't kiss the ring. I was protecting my assets. That makes me a smart businessman, Chancellor, not a killer." Victoria was interrogated in her corner office, her demeanor as icy as ever. "My father was losing his mind," she stated coldly. "The kidnapping proved that I had the board drawing up papers to have him declared medically incompetent. I was going to take the CEO chair legally. Why would I risk a murder charge when I was days away from winning?" But Chance had found the forged documents. Victoria hadn't just been drawing up papers. She had been blackmailing 2 board members to secure their votes a secret. Victor had discovered the morning of the gala. Victor had threatened to disown her publicly. And then there was Nick, the moral compass of the family, the one who always claimed to hate his father's ruthless tactics. But Chance discovered a physical altercation between Nick and Victor in the stables the night before the murder. Victor had threatened to ruin Summer's career and strip her of her trust fund if Nick didn't fall in line and defend the family against the Abbotts. Nick had left Victor bleeding on the stable floor. "He threatened my daughter," Nick growled in the interrogation room, his eyes dark with a familiar Newman rage. "I hit him. I wanted to kill him in that moment, but I didn't poison his champagne. I don't hide in the shadows. The pressure of the investigation acted as a pressure cooker on the Newman family. With Victor gone and the police circling them like vultures, the fragile bonds of kinship snapped entirely. The reading of the will by Michael Baldwin only poured gasoline on the fire. Victor had left the company in a trust requiring a unanimous vote from the siblings to appoint a new CEO. It was a final cruel manipulation from beyond the grave designed to make them tear each other apart. And tear each other apart they did. The Newman Enterprises boardroom became a battleground. Victoria sat at the head of the mahogany table, refusing to relinquish the chair. Adam paced the room, threatening to release Victoria's blackmail files to the press if she didn't vote for him. Nick shouted them both down, disgusted by their greed, while their father wasn't even cold in the ground. "You are vultures," Nikki wept, standing in the doorway of the boardroom, watching her children destroy each other. "Your father is dead, and you are dancing on his grave for a title. He made us this way." Mom Victoria fired back, her composure finally shattering. "He taught us that power is the only thing that matters. We are just honoring his legacy." The empire was crumbling, the stock was plummeting, the family was broken. Genoa City watched in morbid fascination as the great Newman dynasty devoured itself from the inside out, and then the shocking climax arrived. It was a rainy Tuesday morning when Chance Chancellor walked into the Newman Ranch living room. The entire family was gathered, ordered by the GCPD not to leave the premises. The tension in the room was a physical weight. Adam was pouring a drink. Victoria was texting furiously. Nick was staring into the cold fireplace. Nikki sat on the sofa, a hollow shell of the vibrant matriarch she once was. We have the lab results back from the secondary trace evidence. Chance announced, his voice carrying over the sound of the rain, lashing against the windows. We found a microscopic drop of the synthesized neurotoxin on the cuff of a jacket worn the night of the gala. We also traced the cryptocurrency payment made to the dark web supplier who synthesized the poison. Adam froze. Victoria looked up. Nick turned around. Chance bypassed all three of them. He walked past Nikki. He stopped in front of the one person who had been sitting quietly in the corner, the one person who had been playing the role of the grieving daughter, the peacemaker, the one who had been entirely overlooked. Abigail Newman Abbott Chance said, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt, "You are under arrest for the murder of Victor Newman." A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. Abby Nick breathed, his eyes wide with utter disbelief. "No, no, Chance, you've made a mistake. Abby wouldn't." Abby stood up. The shimmering, bubbly, naked heiress, the woman who had spent her entire life trying to bridge the gap between the two most powerful warring families in Genoa City, looked at her brother with eyes completely devoid of light. Her hands trembled, but she held them out to Chance. "It's not a mistake," Abby whispered, her voice cracking. "Abby, what have you done?" Nikki sobbed, rising from the sofa, her hand covering her mouth in horror. Tears finally spilled over Abby's eyelashes, tracking down her cheeks. "I had to stop him," she cried, the dam finally breaking. "I had to. You all saw what he was doing. He kidnapped Uncle Jack. He tortured my mother's brother, my family. We are your family," Abby Victoria yelled, stepping forward. "You are a corporation," Abby screamed back, her voice raw with years of repressed agony. "The Abbotts are a family. Dad was going to kill Jack. He told me." The afternoon of the gala, I went to his office to beg him to make peace. He laughed in my face. He said Jack Abbott was a disease, and he was going to eradicate the entire Abbott family from Genoa City. He was going to destroy Mom. He was going to destroy everything I loved. She looked at the portrait of Victor above the mantel, a shudder racking her body. He wasn't a man anymore. He was a monster. He demanded loyalty, but he only gave us trauma. I put the poison in his glass. I just wanted to sedate him to make him sick enough to step down, but when I saw him standing there bragging about being invincible, I poured the whole vial. Abby looked back at her siblings, her expression a tragic mixture of guilt and grim satisfaction. I saved Uncle Jack. I saved all of you from his control. You're free now. The click of the handcuffs echoing in the silent room was the loudest sound any of them had ever heard. As Chance led Abby out of the ranch into the pouring rain and the flashing lights of the waiting squad cars, the remaining Newmans were left standing in the ruins of their empire. The invincible Victor Newman was dead, murdered, not by a corporate rival or a lifelong enemy, but by the daughter who had simply loved her other family more. The shock waves of Abby's confession would rock Genoa City to its very core, forever altering the landscape of power, loyalty, and love. The Newman family had finally won the war against Victor, but in the end, the victory had cost them their souls.